Hello and welcome. I'm Reverend Nhien, founder of Evolving Enneagram.
And I'm Angela Joy, Evolving Enneagram faculty.
If you've been seeking a compassion-based, contemplative approach to Enneagram-informed transformation, you are most certainly in the right place. This is where contemplation meets the Enneagram. So we're in week 3 of a 12-week Sunday talk series based on the theme, Evolving Toward a Unifying Vision. The specific theme for the next 2 weeks is meeting the moment, reacting versus responding. And today's talk is titled The Empty Boat and Our Enneagram Triggers from Reacting to Responding. We are going to take today in 3 parts. In part 1, I'll begin by talking about this idea of like responding versus reacting. We'll take a brief look at this from a spiritual perspective, as well as from a scientific perspective, borrowing from the work of Daniel Kahneman in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. In part 2, Angela will share examples of Enneagram type based triggers to help you identify some of the common triggers for your Enneagram type. And then in part 3, Angela will close our time together with a deactivation practice from Oren Sofer's book, Say What You Mean. So the 2 books, Thinking Fast and Slow and Say What You Mean, are both recommended reading for our program, Evolving Toward a Unifying Vision. And that program launched just this past Saturday. If you are listening to today's talk on Sunday, January 26th, know that there's still time for you to join this program, as we'll be having our next class soon, but we also are recording all sessions. So it's never really too late to join. So with that, let's launch in. So part 1, responding versus reacting. I'd like to open with a Taoist parable on the empty boat that's excerpted from Father Thomas Merton's translation of The Way of Chuang-Tzu. So I invite you, only if it's safe to do so, for you to take this moment to perhaps even close your eyes or just get situated in a posture that's comfortable and receptive as I share this reading. The way to get clear of confusion and free of sorrow is to live with Tao in the land of the great void. If a man is crossing a river and an empty boat collides with his own skiff, even though he be a bad-tempered man, he will not become very angry. But if he sees a man in the boat, he will shout at him to steer clear. If the shout is not heard, he will shout again and yet again and begin cursing. And all because there is somebody in the boat. Yet if the boat were empty, he would not be shouting and not angry. If you can empty your own boat, crossing the river of the world, no one will oppose you. No one will seek to harm you. A light will shine around you as if you had swallowed the sun and the moon. I invite you to take a moment and even pause this video if you wish, as you ask yourself, what comes up for me with this teaching? If you practice Lectio Divina, this might be a great passage to use for that. If you can empty your own boat, crossing the river of the world, a light will shine around you as if you had swallowed the sun and the moon. So I first read a version of this story maybe 18 years ago, and it had a really big impact on me. Uh, it really was one of the first things that caused me to think how much of my suffering was not the result of something that happened, but rather my story around what happened. because I thought, oh yeah, if a boat just hit me, like I wouldn't have this story of like, oh my God, that was so disrespectful that that person like totally ignored me and didn't notice me and like hit his boat against mine, like all these stories that I might tell myself that are related to my ego or my personality. And it got me on a journey of starting to recognize things like this fact that boats, I mean, it's not like the boat hitting mine might not cause me pain or disruption, right? There is some pain there that I can honor. But as the Buddhists teach, there's a distinction between pain, just like the inevitable pain of life, and the additional suffering that we can actually cause upon ourselves by our own reactivity and allowing that to take hold of the fullness of our experience. In Buddhism, they call that the second arrow. The first arrow might be the empty boat or the boat that hits us. And then the second arrow is like the story I'm telling about it, the belief I have about it, and the need that I then have to fiercely protect or be outraged by this disrespect by this person or to defend my sense of worthiness, So just really considering for yourself how you might, depending on whether a boat is empty or is perceived as empty or populated with a person, whether you shoot that second arrow, right? And it was the beginning of me realizing that, oh, when we react, we give away our power, right? And at the same time, when we, instead of coming from this reaction, and often in that space of reactivity, coming unskillfully, that I could respond instead, that we can respond instead. And when we do, we have a degree of self-mastery, if you will. We can respond with skillfulness to meet our greatest values and our deepest needs, not just to meet the trigger of the moment, if you will. And what I noticed also is that in that space of responsivity, I'm actually even more able to hold other people's reactivity. Like, let's say that I'm sitting in the boat and there are others in the boat as well. There's something about that calm presence, that calm within the storm, right? That can actually help bring peace to other people as well. And instead of now focusing on trying to fix everyone else's like reactivity. And related to reactivity, I want to just give you a heads up that next week we're going to go into the Enneagram conflict styles. And this is very important to know because some of you are thinking, oh, I'm the one of the calm Enneagram types. I don't have reactivity. To say that we're going to look at how all types have a form of reactivity, and it may not be obvious from the outside because the reactivity is actually a pushing away inwardly rather than an expressing outwardly. So just the heads up, that will be next Sunday's talk. And so related to this, I want to say that it should be obvious, right? All humans react. It's part of our humanity. And if you've been listening to our Evolving Enneagram Types for any degree of time now, you know that we don't demonize or make wrong our humanity. In fact, we include it as part of our spiritual life, as our spiritual beings. And so just recognizing that we're not making reactivity bad. In fact, I want to honor that reacting is a legitimate and instinctive response to life, to a situation, right? And in fact, a fast, impulsive, instinctive reaction can save your life. If I put my hand on the stove and it's hot, pulling back is a great idea, like in this moment. And these responses are good for saving our lives, right? But I want to say there's a difference between like basic pure self-preservation, right? That is life affirming and preserving our egoic structure or our personality fixation, our personality identifications, right? Preserving our egos in any way, which can actually be life negating instead of expanding. And so I want to quote Robert Brummett, again, I mentioned him last week. He was one of my mentors in seminary. He wrote the book, Birthing a Greater Reality, A Guide for Conscious Evolution. This is one of the lines from that book. Humanity's two strongest drives are the drive for self-preservation and the drive for self-transcendence. Again, from a spiritual lens, protecting our personalities, our identities keeps us limited. And we react or defend in ways that are often disproportionate to the situation. I shared a lot about that just even this past week, talking about the myths of separation, how as an Enneagram Type 3, when someone disappoints me in some way, when I thought they were going to help me, I have this huge life old story around not getting help. And so in that moment, I might not be responding to just this one discrete small act that this person committed. Instead, I have this bigger overreactive story around it, and I don't want to speak to this person from that space. So that's just one example of how that might look in my life. And so, practically speaking, thinking about the difference between this and, say, responding, which comes from more thoughtful, intentional, more skillful and deliberate action that involves like weighing the options, taking a larger look at like what's actually true here, doing a little reality check. That practically speaking, I want to offer some science now to give you a framework for what this might look like from like the brain perspective. So one way of looking at this, again, from the scientific perspective, is the prefrontal cortex, which is located at the front of the brain, plays a significant role in our executive functioning, right? Decision making, self control, problem solving, all essential components of a well thought out response. Then there's the primitive brain, meaning just earlier, we're not judging it as a less than, but the amygdala in particular, right, is responsible for our emotional, instinctive reactions. When we're under stress or feeling threatened, including ego threats, right, the amygdala can sort of take over and hijack our brain, leading to impulsive reactions instead of skillful responses that actually get our needs met, right? And so referencing Daniel Kahneman in his book, again, Thinking Fast and Slow, he teaches that our brains are wired for what he calls System 1 and System 2 thinking. System 1 represents the reacting mode, which is fast, intuitive, driven by emotions, which, fuel that reaction. It's our brain's default mode, especially in high stress situations. On the other hand, System 2 is the responding mode. It's slower, more deliberate, requires conscious effort. Again, we're not making one system bad and another one better, but recognizing that sometimes the faster system uh, takes over when it's more appropriate to wait for the responding mode to kind of ground ourselves and have a response, right? So I want to just briefly summarize for you, and you can look at this chart next to me here, that System 1 is fast, operates often subconscious from the subconscious level, is automatic, can help us in everyday decisions, like, not really thinking about like, well, even the exit I normally take. But here's the reality of it. It's also not quite reliable. It's more error prone, right? Because if you think about it, it has to operate really quickly and it has to judge based on patterns, right? So that's not always like looking at the specificity of the situation. System 2 operates more slowly, requires conscious effort, is more effortful. It takes a little bit more energy. And so that's part of our brains, right? Our brains operating on System 1, we like to be efficient in our brains, of course, as a Type 3. I love that, right? But like just this idea that the brain wants to be efficient. So that's a part of why it's not as effortful. So we need to make that extra effort, right? And then this is for complex decisions. I'd say maybe some political decisions or decisions about what we purchase, like balancing our checkbook, things like that. So this is more, I can't say it's perfect, but it is more reliable than the other because of that sort of time to like look a little bit more holistically at a situation. So with that, I'm going to talk about how to respond when reacting is not appropriate, meaning like what empowers us to respond in cases where that fast brain isn't ideal for us. And I want to say that, of course, the reason in part that we at Evolving Enneagram focus on contemplative practices and the Enneagram is simply that we have found it to work. This idea that like when we engage in contemplative practices, we give our consciousness this cushion, this space And it's best described in the words of Viktor Frankl, who, as many of you already know, he wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And he wrote this from the perspective of being a prisoner in a Nazi concentration camp. So I always think if he can do it, we can all do it. He writes, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and our freedom. Right? Freedom from our own impulses, right? That don't always serve the highest good. And what supports us in responding rather than reacting is this knowing that we can't learn this in the spur of the moment, right? Contemplative practices are vital. And so this is part of why, Angela will be leading us through one here today. But before she does that, I'm going to invite Angela to also support this journey for us by inviting some self-awareness, right? We first have to become self-aware that we're reacting and that we're triggered. And so the Enneagram is a profound tool for self-awareness. So I'm going to hand it over to Angela right now to go over some common, these are just examples. This is not the definitive list, right? Just some examples of Enneagram-based type triggers. With that, Angela.
Thanks, Nhien. So moving into part 2, we are going to discuss some conflict triggers for all 9 types. Now, of course, many things can trigger us. Yet there are a few things based on our type that can tend to trip us up a little bit more than others. So here are just a few examples that we've come up with to invite you to reflect upon. So as I go through these, I invite you to notice whether you get triggered by these potential triggers. So with type 1, notice whether you get triggered when others aren't held accountable or see themselves as above the rules, when people don't take things seriously, or when others create chaos. Type 2, notice whether you get triggered when your help is rejected or when others don't listen to your advice, when others don't show sufficient appreciation, or when people significant to you don't like you. Type 3, notice whether you get triggered when others make you look bad, especially when it doesn't fit how you want to be seen. Notice when others don't recognize your efforts, or when others meander in a conversation. Type 4, notice whether you get triggered when there's no space for difficult feelings and you are labeled too much or overly sensitive. Notice when others assume they understand what you are experiencing, and when others won't wade in to the deep end. So with type 5, notice whether you get triggered when others do incompetent work or don't follow the instructions, when your participation is expected or demanded by others, and when others are clingy or emotional and expect an emotional response, or maybe any response. Type 6, notice whether you get triggered when others say, "Don't worry," or otherwise dismiss your doubts or concerns. Notice when others misuse or abuse their authority. Notice if you get triggered when others pressure you to make a hasty decision. Type 7, notice whether you get triggered when others try to micromanage you or make you do boring tasks. When others judge your joy or enthusiasm as shallow. Or when others don't let you bend the rules. Type 8, notice whether you get triggered when others talk and continually process without decisive action. When others use their power to hurt people. Or when others perceive you as angry or fighting when you're just excited and passionate. Type 9, notice whether you get triggered when others are disruptive, when others expect or push you to do something. Notice whether you get triggered when you feel overlooked or left out. You may have noticed a sense of being triggered just hearing about the triggers. So, moving into part 3, I invite you to use that sense of activation as we practice this closing meditation, originally taught by Oren Sofer in his book, Say What You Mean. So, if you can, where you are, find a quiet place, close your eyes, and just take a few minutes to settle your mind and body. Allow your attention to gather with the sensations of breathing in and breathing out. As you breathe in, can you notice any increase in energy or vitality in your body? That's a subtle form of the sympathetic activation. And as you breathe out, can you notice any settling, calming, or soothing? That's deactivation. Next, call to mind a slightly challenging conversation, past or future, or even one of the triggers that we mentioned earlier. Begin to feel the physiological effects of activation in your nervous system. Then put the issue aside, turning your attention back to a neutral reference point, maybe your feet on the ground or your seat in the chair, your breath, or perhaps even just your hands sitting on your lap. As the arousal dissipates, pay close attention to any deactivation in your body, any settling, loosening, calming, and any corollary changes in your breath. Moving from activation to deactivation can be as simple as a breath. So feel free to use this meditation anytime through the week as you practice noticing your triggers.
Thank you so much, Angela. Thank you, each one of you, for joining us here. So, as I mentioned earlier, if you're seeking some community, exploration, conscious community, or deeper level teachings, it's not too late to sign up for our Saturday program and to get a recording of the first one. And then again, next Sunday, our talk will continue on this responsivity versus reactivity, and we'll talk about the Enneagram conflict styles and go a little bit more deeply into that. But as we close, I just want to ask you, consider what might emerge if you practiced emptying your own boat as you cross the sometimes tumultuous river of the world. Namaste.